So good morning, all of you. If you could hear me, please type yes on the chat window so that I'm sure that you can hear me. Hello, Vaibhav, Mohit, Gyan, Ayushi, Prithvi, all the others, you can hear me? Great, perfect. So let's get started. Today we have another very exciting webinar. We are going to focus on MBA in Canada, and we have a special guest with us who is a student at Rotman School of Management, and he's going to talk to us about his journey. Before we get started, some preliminary customary stuff that we need to focus on when we actually get onto a webinar. So let's focus on some ground rules and the agenda of today. So we'll start with introduction. We'll focus on the topic of the day. We'll focus on the Q&A in the end. For all those as part of the webinar, please make sure that you post your Q&A on the Q&A window only. I will be taking up questions in the end of the sessions. The idea of this webinar is to keep it crisp and make sure that we make most out of the Akshat here, and I want to make sure all your questions are answered. So keep it relevant to the scope of this webinar. Keep it something that really helps you answer or take a call on why you would want to do an MBA in Canada, right? Ground rules, like I said, please put all your questions on the Q&A window. A quick introduction of myself. Hi, I'm Shrikala. I'm one of the co-founders of Crackverbal. I worked with HP for a long time. Post which I started with Crackverbal in 2011. I'm also part of the ISB Goldman Sachs Fellow Foundation. I'm also part of the Cherry Blair Foundation, where I mentor a lot of women entrepreneurs across the world. I handle the admissions team here at Crackverbal. Akshat, if you could introduce yourself, that would be great. Welcome
Absolutely.
to the webinar.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Akshat. And just to give some context on my background pre-MBA, my professional experience rests on like three distinct pillars. I did my electrical engineering from the College of Engineering, Pune, graduated in 2013 and started working at Oracle as an associate consultant. That's where I was for a year and a half. And I then got an opportunity to work at a startup in the cycling space in Bangalore. They want to start e-commerce operations, and I helped them kickstart an entire e-commerce division from scratch. Did that for a year and ended up taking a plunge into entrepreneurship, where I ran my own company in the performance apparel and wearable technology space. Ran it for 2.5 years, and that's when I felt that it was an opportune time for me to do my MBA. Applied to quite a few schools. Crackverbal helped me through the application process, and I am currently doing my MBA at the Rotman School of Management. I'm about to finish my MBA. It's already been 20 odd months. No, actually 16 odd months. So I'm left with 4 more months in my MBA. And yeah, that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Akshat. So we'll talk about it a lot more in the next couple of minutes. Before we get started, a quick success update on the kind of on the students who've got into top schools this year. So it has been a great year for us, for students who've got into a lot of great programs for MBA as well as MIM. Here are a few people who got in. People got into Cornell, Tepper, people got into McDonough, Macomb, SAID. Most of them have got multiple admits, so it has been great for all of them. The mentors who have been very crucial and part of our journey, who have helped these students get through these top programs, people from Kellogg and Duke and Fuqua and Cambridge and Oxford, ISB, Tepper. So all of them from different industries, different geographies, who have been part of journey of so many successful students. Some free resources. So all of you, since you are in this in beginning of the year, it's always a time to plan, right? So it's very important that you go in full-fledged with a very good understanding of what else is required with respect to your MBA plan. So make sure that you make use of the Crackverbal YouTube channel. We are one of the highest in this space. with a lot of great content with respect to different schools. How do you go about looking at your profile, what do you need to focus on, essay analysis. So please make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you get a good idea on how you need to go about. All these webinars are also something that are on YouTube, so you could make use of those too. Great resources on ebooks and videos which you could make use of. Please go to the crackable.com website and make sure you go through these resources too. Blogs, again, which will give you an idea on whether GRE is great for an MBA or a GMAT is great for an MBA. A lot of people have these questions, so these are all very well researched articles which will give you a very good idea on how you need to go about it. And obviously, if you are looking at getting your profile evaluated, if you are confused, if you really don't know whether this is the right thing to do, please make sure you get your profile evaluated with us. We would love to help you and give you a right direction on how you need to go about it, right? So cool. So let's get started. So Akshat, you've given us a little bit of background about your pre-MBA in your introduction too, but just wanted to, understand it a little bit more. So, how many years of experience did you have before you thought through, when this thing came in your mind?
So I had around 4 years of experience when I actually thought about doing an MBA and go through this entire process of giving my GMAT and then going through the application process. By the time I joined Rotman, I had 5 years of professional work experience.
Uh-huh. So why did an MBA come to your mind? Why, because entrepreneurship, startup experience, working with Oracle, so many different things. Again, all completely different. So why did even that MBA come to your mind? Doing an MBA come to your mind?
Absolutely. So when I finished my engineering, I started working at Oracle and I was there for a year and a half. And during my time at Oracle, or actually even when I was doing my engineering, uh, as usual, my parents pressured me, go prepare for the CAT exam, do your MBA. It's what everyone's supposed to be doing. So why don't you also do that? And I didn't end up giving my CAT back then. But once I started working at Oracle in Bangalore, my parents also used to live in Bangalore at that point, and they asked me to enroll for crack verbals classroom coaching. I ended up doing that. I attended classes. I think I attended half of the course before I lost interest and dropped out at that point, because at that point I had no clue what I was doing with my career or why was I even attending this class. I had no interest in doing an MBA. My parents wanted me to do one. However, after that, I worked at a startup, got a better understanding of what business is all about and what running an organization as a manager is all about. And I got an even clearer picture when I took my entrepreneurial journey. And over the course of 2.5 years, I just realized that, I have certain gaps in me from having a fundamental understanding of business to be an effective manager or to run a company on my own. And that's when I decided to go out there and do an MBA.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Interesting. So, once you started planning your MBA journey, right? There's so many schools, whether it's Indian schools or US schools or Canadian schools. Why did you choose to apply to Canada? Was there some thought process around that?
So I actually started thinking about doing my MBA sometime in 2018. Sorry, 2017. And in 2017, February onwards was when I gave the GMAT. And luckily, in the first attempt, I managed to get a decent score. In August is when I started applying, like started thinking about the application process and which schools I'm going to apply to. There was a lot of talk about the visa issues that are happening and the immigration issues happening in the US. And Canada seemed like a good alternative for a lot of students at that point who were applying to the US schools, Canada and Australia. I ended up applying to 4 US schools in the first round and one Canadian B school. I felt that, okay, you know what, like 5 schools in round one is decent. Let me go for all my dream schools or the top schools that I'd want to apply. And if nothing works out, then in round two and round three, I'm going to play slightly safe and see what ends up happening. So my idea behind choosing a Canadian school initially was simply because I was not comfortable with the immigration scenario in the US. I am like personally, I wanted to settle abroad. I was not okay with going, spending 3, 4, 5 years on an H-1B visa in the US and then returning back to India. So that is the reason why I ended up choosing a Canadian business school.
Mhm. So, from the time you took your GMAT, so what was your GMAT score?
So my GMAT score was 740.
Awesome, awesome. So, from the time you took your GMAT to, the application, how long was the duration, and what do you think is an ideal duration for most people, who are looking at applying business schools?
Correct. So I took my GMAT in June. That's when I took my GMAT. I had anticipated that, okay, if I need to take a second effort, second attempt, I would do that in July. And July end or August onwards, I would start applying or thinking about the entire application process, because most of the deadlines for different business schools end up being around October, if I'm not wrong. October and November is when they ask for round one applications, and then January onwards, you have your round two applications. So I would say that spending 3 months of time between your giving your GMAT and actually applying to business schools is important, because it's a process that's very intense. I thought that the GMAT is going to be the hardest part, but I was really surprised when I ended up going through this entire application process on how much I need to introspect and understand myself as an individual. Because the why MBA question that a lot of applications ask, it's not something that you think about every waking day of your life unless you actually want to do an MBA. And it requires a lot of thought, because every school, like from India, everybody knows they get like thousands of applications from India. And having clarity of thought in terms of why you want to do an MBA is very important, because you want to ensure that you have a consistent and convincing message, be it in your essays, be it during your interviews, throughout the application process.
Mm-hmm. So, once you got an admit, to the time you actually got into, start your B school, right? So, guys, we already have had a great webinar with Akshat some time back, and in the end of this session, I will give you a link of that webinar too, because that covers more about his GMAT and his application process. Today's webinar, we wanted to focus more on his Rotman experience, more from a perspective that how does an MBA help. So if you're looking at something more, more about his pre-MBA and just before getting to an MBA experience, I will share the webinar link. You could go ahead and view that webinar. Today, let's focus on more on the MBA in Canada part of it, right? So that's what I would want to focus on today. So so like I asked you, Akshat, when you actually got into Rotman, right? So did you do any pre-MBA work, or did you study, or just before to get geared up for your Rotman experience?
Yeah, so my father has a childhood friend who is currently a professor in IIM Ahmedabad. And I just ended up reaching out to him after I got my admit, asking him what is the best way that I could spend. I had 6 months because I got my admit in December. It meant that January to August, I literally had nothing to do besides wrapping up work and thinking about just getting excited about the fact that I'm going to Canada to do an MBA. And when I spoke to him, he suggested I do two things. The first one is get comfortable with using Excel. And the second thing was he asked me to read up a book by Norman Lewis on speed reading, because apparently you have a lot of cases in business school. And when I came here, that was actually true. And just being able to read fast and read effectively was a skill that he felt is important. And I completely agree with that. So these are the two things that I ended up doing from a preparation standpoint before I came here to do my MBA.
Mhm. So what was the admission process like at Rotman, right? Once you get an interview call, what happens and how did the interview go?
Okay. So from an interview standpoint, okay, if I just talk about the entire application, what are the different aspects that Rotman considers when they are looking for a prospective student? I would say your first one would be your academic ability and competence, be it your GMAT, GPA, whatever. In some particular way, you should show that, okay, you can handle the rigors of the academic program here, because Rotman has one of North America's most intense, academically intense MBAs, so MBA programs. And the reason for that is because unlike US schools, which have a grade non-disclosure policy, which reduces the pressure on students on the academic front, Rotman doesn't have a grade non-disclosure policy. And when I say a grade non-disclosure policy, it means that students in schools which have a grade non-disclosure policy aren't allowed to tell a potential recruiter their GPA. Whereas Rotman lets every recruiter out there know what a student's GPA is, and it ends up becoming a filtering mechanism for students. So that is one thing that they really screen for, academic ability. The second thing is your past work experiences, the quality of your work experience, not the quantity. The third thing would be the impact you've had, be it in the professional sphere or in your personal sphere. In some way, you got to show that you are an individual who excels at something. So they call it the spike factor here. So that is something that everyone might want to think about. Okay, what's the one thing that they're really good at? And the last thing that they look for is leadership potential. That, okay, how easy or how malleable is this person? How much can we groom this person to become a leader once they go out from the MBA program? So these are the four aspects that Rotman ends up considering during the application process, and they screen for these aspects even during the interview. So the interview at Rotman, yes, I did have like a face-to-face interview with an admissions, with somebody from the admissions team, but they also had a video interview where they had two pre-recorded questions that I had to answer. So that was something that at that point was new. I think now a lot of schools have a video interview component, but at that point, I I didn't know how to prepare for it. Besides whatever information they sent, I used that as a guideline and prepared for that video interview.
Right. So from the time you were interviewed to the time you received an admit, how long was that?
So I was interviewed in October end. I received my admit on 13th December. I still remember the date.
Okay. So what happens once you reach there? Like what is it that you see, and what is it that you had in your mind as per expectations, and what did you actually see there?
Oh, I had a very interesting conversation with my cab driver when I landed here. So I basically got to the airport, and it was a 40-kilometer drive from the airport to the Rotman School of Management. And my cab driver apologized for the traffic. And I come from Bangalore, just to give everybody context. My cab driver apologized for the traffic. It took him, I asked him, why are you apologizing? He said that, oh, it's showing 45 minutes now, but it generally takes 30 minutes to cover these 40 kilometers. I'm like, okay, you know what? Like, don't worry about this. I've seen much worse. So anyway, that was just something on the side. The first thing that stood out to me is that it can actually get very hot here in the summers. It was like 35 degrees where I landed, so I just felt at home. It was nice. And besides that, Rotman has something called the pre-MBA program where you can come settle down before the actual MBA program starts. And they have some primer courses for people. Say, for example, I was an engineer. I had no context on finance or accounting. So there were some primer courses for students with an engineering background on that front. Whereas for people who come from a commerce or an arts background, there were also some courses on maths, on English, so that you just feel comfortable in terms of performing at your best once the MBA program starts in full swing. So this pre-MBA program tends to be for 2 weeks. You can also end up spending that time looking for accommodation, just settling down, getting to know your peers. So it was good. I would recommend that if you get an admit into Rotman, do attend the pre-MBA. It allows you time to settle into a new environment.
Mhm. So, do they have like an international student ambassador, someone who's in touch with you as soon as you get an admit, so that you figure out the accommodation part and the other aspects?
So Rotman has something called the Six Squad, and for this year's batch, basically I'm from the class of 2020. For the class of 2021, I was part of the Six Squad, and the Six Squad ends up holding sessions, webinars basically, for which are private webinars for the incoming class on different topics. So we covered aspects such as academics. We covered in one webinar, we covered the aspects of housing. In one webinar, we covered careers, just so that students or basically incoming students get some context in terms of what to expect before they even land here. And the students are also encouraged to reach out to these volunteers who are part of the sixth cohort in case they require any help in terms of understanding what to expect in the MBA program, or even for things like housing, where what are the different websites that you can use to find accommodation? What if you don't get university housing? Because very few people end up getting university housing at Rotman, since it's a school located bang in downtown Toronto, and that means that there is always a space crunch even at the university. When you look at student housing, they end up prioritizing undergrad students over grad students. So you do have that community which ends up providing you support as an incoming student in terms of anything and everything associated with what to expect.
Right. That's interesting. In fact, that's so helpful for students who are actually, absolutely new to this whole process, right? So,
Absolutely.
uh, so how big is your cohort? How big is the class size, and how many, international students are there? What is the diversity aspect of Rotman?
Okay. So my cohort is 330 odd people. However, in the class of 2021, Rotman reduced their class size to 290. And by what I know, they're going to maintain that new class size at around 290. And when you look at diversity, Rotman has always had the most diverse cohort across all North American MBA programs. Like, it's always ranked among the top two or top three always. And if you look at a split between women and men, it's basically a 40-60 split right now. In my cohort, it was 35 65. They're trying to move to 50-50 over a period of time. That is something that they're trying to do as a school, encourage more women to come and do an MBA and get out there in the workforce. From the perspective of from international students, I think 50% of the batch is domestic students. Domestic students include students who hold a PR meaning a permanent residency in Canada. And the other 50% end up being from different parts of the world. In my cohort, you had people from holding like 48 different passports. So it's a very diverse cohort. I think that's one thing that really stood out to me here.
Okay. And how many Indians in a batch?
Oh, yes. So Rotman has this policy where they cap any nationality at 15% of the total cohort size. So that is something that everyone should be mindful of. If you're applying, they get like a ton of applications from South Asia and especially India and even China. So they 15% of 300, or I guess around 45 students, that's the number of Indians you end up having in a batch.
Right, right. So yeah, so that's pretty much a an average of percentage of Indians in most top schools across the world, right? So often. So in terms of the funding aspect, right? So since MBA becomes a very huge investment, for anyone, how did you manage, or was there any planning around that, and how did that go?
So on a funding front, I would say that I ended up taking like basically funding a part of my tuition using Prodigy Finance, because it was the fastest way for me at that point to get funding and apply for my visa. The only way you can actually end up applying for your visa if you have your funding in place, and Prodigy Finance literally does that for you in 3 days. They have they have pretty high interest rates if you look at it, like around 10 to 11%, or actually anywhere between 9 to 11%. That's what I would say. The option that a lot of students have is that once you end up getting your permanent residency, which a lot of people apply for once they land here, you can get a line of credit from a Canadian bank at the prime interest rate here, which is around 3 or 3.5, 4%. And you get a line of credit for $100,000 as an MBA student. And so a lot of people end up transferring their Prodigy Finance loan to this line of credit. They basically pay down that entire Prodigy Finance loan using this line of credit. And that ends up reducing the interest burden significantly for people.
Right, right, right. So in terms of the course curriculum, right? So how is that structured, and what are the key things that students need to understand when they actually kickstart their MBA program?
So on a course curriculum front for the first year, you do not have electives. So there are 4 terms in the first year. You do not have any electives for the first 3 terms. They're called foundation terms. Everyone has to study the same thing. It's very academically intense. Like that is one thing that really surprised me in terms of how much work students need to put on the academic front to just get through, like spend sleepless nights and whatnot. I thought I was done with all of that during my engineering, but no, I was wrong. So that is something that really stood out. In the final term of the first year, you are allowed to take a set of electives from a very limited set of options in your first year. However, in your second year, you have the luxury and the liberty to craft your MBA experience the way you want. uh, you can take courses from a very long list of electives. So we have to actually bid on courses because there are some courses that are so popular that they end up being oversubscribed. So we end up bidding on courses, not with money, but with how important that course is to us. So we end up, they use a tool called Course Match, and then we end up like ranking our courses, and accordingly they end up assigning our preferences to us. And depending on whether you want to graduate with a major in say finance or consulting, business design, marketing, whatever, you can end up choosing your electives that you want. If you are not very fussed about the major that you want to graduate with, you can choose from a wide range of electives. You can pick electives from marketing, you can pick some from strategy, some from finance, and go about your MBA that way. Recruiters here don't care about what your major is at all. And for example, have ended up picking courses across a wide spectrum of streams that are available to us. One thing that I ended up focusing on my second year is developing my soft skills during the MBA program, like the leadership skills that I can develop, because I was I'm an engineer basically, and so when I'm an engineer, I think very analytically. I don't think that the people aspect is important. That is my mentality before coming into an MBA, but my perspective on that front has really changed. At the end of the day, organizations are made up of people, and if you can't manage people and if you can't deal with people, there's no way you're going to be an effective or efficient manager, no matter how smart you are. And that is one aspect that I've tried to focus on in my second year, taking a bunch of courses that end up developing soft skills or focus on the people aspect of management.
Right. So there's one more question that a lot of people ask me, while they're going through this process, right? They say, which is the best school in Canada for consulting? Which is the best school for finance and or technology related roles, right? So what is Rotman known for, or do you think something like that even exists?
So, okay, if you ask me, like the word on the street here is that Rotman and Ivy are pretty comparable in terms of their standing, especially on the consulting front. If you want to do finance, then Rotman is considered to be a finance school and has an upper hand on the finance front. But Rotman and Ivy, otherwise on the consulting front, are pretty equal. Uh, on the technology front, technology is very new in Toronto. However, it is growing really fast. Like if you look at the reports, different startup ecosystem reports that you have different organizations across the world publishing, Toronto is growing faster than San Francisco over the past 2 or 3 years. So it's doing really well on the technology front. Yesterday, Google announced like 5,000 new jobs in Toronto itself. So there's a lot of investment that the big technology companies, as well as startups in the AI, machine learning, quantum computing, healthcare, fintech space are investing in Toronto. And that ends up providing students interested in technology and
Hello?
opportunity to explore those career paths. Hello. Sorry, I think you froze, Shrikala.
Hey, I'm sorry, Akshat. I think I lost you.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Hi, guys. Can you all hear us and see the screen? I'm sorry, I think it got disconnected for a minute. If you could
Yep.
just type in. Yes, okay, perfect. So yeah, so Akshat, you were talking about technology
Technology.
companies.
Okay, where did I drop off? Like, did I drop off or did you drop off?
I think I got disconnected.
Okay, so talking about technology, there's a lot of opportunity here. No school at the end of the day in Toronto has been able to, or in Canada specifically, has been able to uh, claim their competency on the technology space. So students across different schools end up entering into that industry. So consulting, I would say Ivy and Rotman. Finance, I would say uh, like Rotman's been known for finance. And yes, so these are two schools that are pretty much on par.
Okay. So in terms of scholarships, right, this is also something that everybody is, always talking about that. I remember when you got some kind of scholarship when you applied. Is there any thought process behind what the admission committee looks at when they're looking at scholarships for students, especially international students at Rotman?
Well, I know they don't care a lot about the GMAT because I know this. There's this one person in my batch who had like a 780 GMAT, literally the highest GMAT in our entire batch, and nobody before him at Rotman, at least for
Wow.
the past three, four
Okay.
years, had scored a 780, and he still didn't get a scholarship. So I know that the GMAT doesn't matter. Uh, what ends up mattering for them, I guess, is a lot of factors associated with your work experience, how well your interviews go, uh, how much they want you as a student in terms of, okay, can is this how employable is this person, what kind of cred will they bring to the school. And I think those are the factors that end up mattering a lot more. If you ace your interview, you should get a good scholarship. That would be my I think that's the biggest factor.
Okay. And what are the kind of internship timelines you get? So do you get a chance to do an internship in the first year and the second year? Like, when does this actually happen?
So Rotman has something called a flexible internship program. It's the only school in Canada that has this thing. And what the flexible internship program allows students to do is that you can do your internship in any of the 3 semesters in your second year. So you can do it in the summer, which is what usually MBA programs do, basically between May and September. You can do it in the fall, which is the term after that, or you can do it in the winter, which is the term now. Anytime in your second year, you can end up doing your internship. And the advantage that that brings is that students don't need to stress a lot if they don't get the internship of choice in the summer. It gets very competitive out here in the summer because you have uh, students from Shoe Lake, from Queens, from uh, Ivy, everybody, or and Rotman, everybody gunning for the same internships. However, if you look at internships in fall and winter, there are not that many takers because Rotman is literally the only school that has is feeding students into those internships. So it becomes less competitive, and that allows students to hold back in terms of not compromising on what internship that they want to do. It's also helpful for career switchers because career switchers find it difficult in the summer to get the internship of choice sometimes because it's so competitive and you already have a large pool of people who might already have prior experience in that industry or that function or whatever. So career switchers tend to wait and then get an internship in fall and winter. The advantage you have with your winter internship is that you by the time you finish your internship you're graduating, so you can, if you have done well, you can just transition into a full-time opportunity into that particular role.
Right. So typically, like it happens in, other countries also, does internship, when you get an internship, is it like almost sure that these are the kind of companies that will hire you in the end, or how does that work? Or is it also a time where you're experimenting on different kind of roles that you want to do and you eventually figure out that this is what I want to do post my MBA?
So it's a mix. It depends student to student, and it also depends industry to industry. I would say finance and consulting, most of the internships end up translating to a full-time offer until unless and until you don't hit the mark for them at whatever parameters they have, and they feel that okay, you're not a good fit internally or you might not be capable enough to take that role depending on your performance during the internship.
Hmm.
For roles in technology and say marketing or any other stream out there, you do not have that luxury generally. I would say that maybe 10, 15, or 10 to 20% of students taking these other tracks end up converting their internship into a full-time offer.
Okay. Okay.
Whereas for consulting and finance is the other way around, like 80 to 90% end up converting their internship to a full-time offer.
Okay. So, how does Rotman help you with these internship options, or do you have to go and figure that out? Even in terms of, your end, the career, the jobs that you get post your MBA, right? So, does like we have it in India, right? Placements. So, how does
Yes.
that, work in Rotman?
Well, I would say that was the biggest, like one of the biggest shocks to me as an international student is how people approach recruitment and careers here. Now, when you look at a business school in India, be it any of the IIMs, or I'm not sure about the ISB, but at least any of the IIMs, you have this day zero, day one, day two, day three, and over 4 days you have literally like maybe 100 companies coming to campus, and you are
Yeah.
interviewing back to back across these different companies, and there's a lot of stress packed into these 4 days, and if you don't have a job by the end of that fourth day, you're in deep trouble. So it's it's very different here because you don't have companies coming like that to campus. So generally what the career center does here is facilitate the entire recruitment experience for students. So they don't bring companies to campus and then companies conduct interviews. They organize something called info sessions where over basically between October, November, December in the first year, our internship cycle or recruitment cycle starts in January. So October, November, December, you have companies coming to campus talking about what it's like working there at their particular organization, what are the different roles and opportunities available, whom can you connect with at that organization if you're interested in applying. So it's on you to go and actually build that connection with them. And yeah, so it's very informal that way, and a lot of the onus lies on the students to go out there and build those relationships with people, and then figure out their own career. I really like this approach. Like initially it was hard because I mean we're used to spoon feeding back in India, where every you have companies coming to campus, you're submitting your resumes, and then you're sitting and interviewing. But I really like this process because it gave me an opportunity to go and speak with people across different organizations and different functions and figure out whether I'm even somebody who might fit well in that organization or even while doing that role. For example, during the summer, I was interested in doing consulting. And I ended up speaking to a lot of people in the consulting space, be it the McKinsey, BCG, Bains. I even ended up interviewing for one of those firms. And then I've basically figured out, okay, technology is something that I'm interested in. And this is not like consulting is not something that I truly want to do just because everyone at Rotman does consulting. That's the reason why I'm actually applying for consulting jobs. So you have this FOMO thing, the fear of missing out. So that's what got to me. And over a period of 3 months, I figured out, okay, technology is what I want to do. Fintech is something that's really big in Canada because the financial services industry is big. And I got an opportunity to work as part of a technology strategy intern at the Royal Bank of Canada. So it was more like an internal consulting role, but it allowed me to stay in touch with technology.
Great. So, one very important, question that, I have, or, most people have this when they are planning their journey. What changed in you, so in terms of your perspective of how you look at things, you worked in India, comfort zone, family, there's everything that, when you're in India, everything, right? You can, like, you have experimented on your professional the kind of jobs you've taken up also, right? So what has changed for you in terms of your perspective, and more on why, how an MBA has actually helped you grow to whatever you are today?
Okay. So one aspect that I think has changed for me is that I've got a new perspective of competition. Now, if you think that the MBA application process is competitive, wait till you get into business school. So what's happened is that you had 4,000 applications come to the Rotman School of Management during the MBA applications process, and they end up filtering, and then you have your cohort of 350. But then when this cohort of 350 ends up competing for, say, like you'll have 150 people gunning for consulting jobs, and then you'll have 30 consulting jobs on campus. And when everyone's gunning for that, there's literally a new dimension and a new perspective to competition. But I feel that's important because A, you realize you're not as smart as you think, but it can also get really mentally taxing. And it's important sometimes to get out of business school. Like, you're always in the business school bubble, you're comparing yourself with your peers. They're literally some of the smartest people in the city, and if you just keep comparing yourself with them and interacting with them, you're going to go into this hole where you think that, okay, I'm worthless, I'm worth nothing, I can achieve nothing. So just getting that outside perspective, I feel, is important. And uh, understanding that things do work out, that is something that I picked up during the MBA. Like, don't take life too seriously. It's okay, it's fine, everything works out. um, the other aspects that I would like to touch upon is the people puzzle. So I like I mentioned before, I didn't used to focus a lot on soft skills. I thought that it's not important, and if I can build the best financial model out there, who in the world is not going to want to recruit me? So I during the recruitment process, or even during the first year, when you end up taking different courses, you end up doing a bunch of case studies, you end up hearing a perspective from somebody who's worked in an NGO in Africa for 5 years and is sitting with you in class on how they think about business and how they think about how management should be done. You start realizing that, okay, you know what, like, these other aspects actually matter if I want to be effective and successful out there in the business world. The third aspect that I feel is important is just being able to think and communicate in a very structured and clear manner. uh, that is something that I've been trying to do over the past 2 years, and hopefully on this chat I've been able to be slightly effective at doing that. And yeah, the last.
You have,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, you have been,
Oh, okay.
carry on. Sorry.
Okay. And yeah, the last bit that I feel is just the growth that I've seen in me, be it on the academic front, just the hard skills that I've picked up sitting in classroom, be it on the professional front where I've learned and understood better on how I should be managing my career. And even on the personal front, I feel like, not to get philosophical, but 2 years in an MBA, you end up learning how to live life and the true meaning of life and what it means for you. So these are some of the things that have really changed for me over the past 16 months.
That's been extremely insightful and extremely inspiring too. So, again, there are some key challenges that you face. If, say, for example, if I have to tell you, okay, Akshat, if you have to do things differently, right? Some key things that you believe that if I had done it better or differently, it would have, been really, worth it, or something more around the challenges that you faced while you were there at Rotman. Any specific aspects that you would like to share?
Okay, basically a hindsight bias, right? So in hindsight, what would I have done differently? Hmm, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to say that, oh, I could have maybe learned earlier how I should be managing my career or whatever, but it's worked out for me. Like, I was able to secure a good summer internship. I figured out, like, I was offered a full-time job from there, but I didn't really want to do that. I figured that out during my 8 months at that organization. And I have like two standing offers right now from two companies. So it's fine. Like, things do work out. So I wouldn't say that, there's anything that I would do differently. However, I would say that there were some challenges that I'd like to highlight in terms of my MBA experience. And the first bit that I would say is really important is having a very strong support system and a sense of community around you. Uh, like, there's one thing being acquaintances with 330 odd people in your cohort, but have these 3 or 4 people around you who you can rely on when things might get tough, be it on the academics front, be it on the personal front. Like, you cannot influence a lot of things that might be happening back at home, literally 30,000 miles away. But having some sort of a support system of friends that you can talk to about things like that is very important. uh, even on the professional front, when you're out there looking for internships, when you're out there looking for full-time jobs, it can get challenging sometimes. And just knowing that, okay, somebody's there, somebody's got my back, that's helpful. Second thing that I would say was challenging that I already touched upon was just the entire approach towards recruitment. Do not treat your meetings with, say, a potential recruiter or with somebody out there in the industry on a transactional basis that, oh, I'm going to go and tell this person how awesome I am. And I'm going to go and like fake interest into what they do. And then they're going to offer me a job. Like, that's not how things work. Don't walk into a meeting anticipating that, okay, if I meet this person, they're going to give me a job. Treat every meeting with people out there in the industry, just build true human relationships, right? Like, don't treat people as transactions, like I will do this for you, then you will do this for me. And the last bit that I would say is not getting caught in the FOMO trap, basically fear of missing out. um, there are so many things happening in business school. We have like 50 odd student clubs. And I mean, if I just end up joining all student clubs, i I might end up adding another $10,000 to my tuition loan, which doesn't make sense. So you there are so many things happening on that front. Then you have so many different career options where each and every other friend of yours is applying, and you're like, hey, that sounds interesting, I should be trying that. But just spend some time before your MBA, like once you get an admit and when you actually join school, understanding and thinking about who you are as a person, what you really want. Literally write it down and stick it on the wall on day one once you land here, so that if you get off track, you know that, okay, you know what, this is what I came here to do. Things might change. Like, you might learn something new and then you might want to try it out. That's fine. But don't go spraying everywhere here and there, because then you end up stretching yourself too thin, and it's not a really pleasant experience.
Right, right. Any tips for, so you've already given us, so much information, but anything that you should not expect, especially for, from an international perspective or from an Indian student perspective, right? We go with a lot of expectations and, a lot of thoughts and assumptions on our mind. Anything that you feel that, this is not what it is, right? Or this is not what you should expect. So any, advice over there?
Yeah, two things. So one is for the pre-MBA phase, just remember that the GMAT and the GPA are not anything and everything. I know people with like perfect GPAs and 760 GMATs who have not gotten admit, and I know somebody with a 600 GMAT in my cohort. So like from India itself. So GMATs and GPAs are not everything. Look at your application holistically. If you have a good GMAT and GPA, that's great, but that does not mean that you slack on the other aspects. Ensure that you don't take your eye off the ball. And if you don't have something that's optimal, that's fine. Like, think about, okay, how can I maximize other aspects of my application and bring that out? Like, don't try too hard, uh, you know trying to explain why you have a low GMAT or GPA. Spend your time showcasing your strengths when you're going through the application process. And the second thing is just expectation setting from what an MBA is. It's not your golden ticket to $1 million bank balance, I would say. Uh, it teaches you a lot as a person, and as a professional, but it is very important that you realize that just because you have an MBA, nobody is going to treat you differently from everyone else out there in the job market. Yes, it does give you a leg up, and it helps you open a lot more doors that wouldn't have opened for you before. But you still got to perform. You still got to showcase that you are somebody who's capable at operating at a top level. And that is something that's very important. Like, don't step off the pedal even once you graduate. I think that's one advice that a prof at Rotman ended up giving me.
Awesome. So thank you, Akshat. What I'll do now is we'll take questions. So all of you, if you have any specific questions, please post it on the Q&A window. I will take each question one by one. So I think, okay. So speed reading by Norman Lewis, Nilish. So I think he got. Okay. So
Okay.
there's a question here. What percentage of the batch would get MBA level jobs after By MBA level jobs, I mean jobs which a mean and median salary specified by the employment report as 85K and above.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. I need to like go and dig through employment reports now to figure that out. I mean, what percent of batch? If it's the median, then I would say 50% of the batch ends up getting more than that. Statistically, that's what makes sense. And 50% end up getting less than that. So I I sorry, I don't know how to add anything more to that answer besides brute
Right.
stat. Yeah.
Right. So there's another interesting question. How is the lack of previous work experience perceived in technology consulting finance sectors? Especially if it's not private equity or VC kind of roles.
Okay.
Especially if you're looking at careers, which is what I think he meant.
Yes. Okay. So I would say career switching, sorry, I would say career switching is less of a problem in consulting, uh, where they are a lot more open to getting people from diverse backgrounds, because at the end of the day, that's what consulting is about, right? Right. You don't end up, even if you do technology consulting, you might do technology consulting for healthcare one day, then your next project, you might do it for a supply in a supply chain context. So they really appreciate people uh, who, who have had different experiences. In the finance industry, I would say that prior experience of any sort surely gives people a leg up. And if you do not have prior experience, it makes your job slightly harder. I'm not saying that it's impossible. There are people who have broken in. Um, it's less of a problem if you're not doing something highly specialized. For example, if you're doing, like, if you want to become an investment banker, which I guess 10 people in our cohort end up becoming every year, then they are pretty open to getting people from diverse backgrounds. You don't require a CFA or a CPA of any sort. But if you want to do something specific, like you want to get into equity research or something of that sort, then having a background does help.
Mhm. I have one other interesting question. So Mohit says, I'm in the process of processing my PR, maybe 5 to 6 months. Should I apply as a domestic student for the 2021 application?
For the 2021 application, sorry, I'm like 2021 means you would be applying in round three, round four, correct, Shrikala?
So no, so I think he'll apply this year, 2021, for the intake in 2021. So he'll apply this year for the 2021 intake. So his idea is whether applying with a PR is a better idea.
So I
That.
mean, the advantage that applying as a PR is going to give to you is that you have a reduced fee as somebody with a PR. The international fee ends up being like $20,000 more than the domestic fee. However, that's not a problem because uh, once you join, like even if you end up getting your permanent residency card in the middle of a term, then any fee you end up paying for subsequent terms ends up becoming the domestic fee and not the international fee. So from fee perspective, it's not a problem. Do you think it's going to give you a leg up in the application process? No, I don't think so. Like, I don't think it matters. At the end of the day, when they look at diversity, when I talked about that 15% nationality cap, if you feel that, oh, I go from, say, being in the Indian pool to being in the domestic pool, that wouldn't be a case, because what ends up happening is that they look at your passport and your passport is going to be Indian. So you're still going to be considered in the Indian pool.
Right, right. I have another, interesting question. So there's someone who's, a slightly older applicant with a lot of years experience. While when he applies, he'll be, around 40.
Okay.
Do you think, should he really consider doing an MBA, since you know that you have had a cohort. So this person's worked in the government of India Bank and, worked on some commercial project finance in 5 years in HR and CFA from MIC5. So what do you think, someone with so much experience should be applying? Should they be applying for an MBA, especially in Canada? Do you have anyone in your cohort who has that much experience and that age level?
I know, like, the oldest person in my batch is 39, and I don't have enough context on why this particular candidate, like, what are they looking at getting out of the MBA. like one of the things that I know is that a lot of the opportunities that end up coming on campus by the career center tend to be focused on people with 4 to 5 to 6 years of work experience, because that's what the average work ex at Rotman is. So a lot of those jobs end up becoming, I guess, irrelevant to a candidate with so much work experience. So yes, so you end up having to require to look for uh, careers outside the school, which is not a problem. I mean, a lot of people do that, despite, like, even like, for example, I did that. I looked for jobs outside the school, and you get the hang of it. I think just having clarity on why doing an MBA is important, and maybe figuring out what type of MBA to do. Do you want to do like an executive MBA from a Canadian business school or a US business school? Maybe that makes more sense for somebody with so much work experience. Or you do a part-time MBA, because then you can work while doing your MBA, and gives you time to get a feel of the Canadian job market and how your prospects might play out after an MBA, because you do get that stamp by the time you graduate. So that can help you. I still feel that an executive MBA might be more useful. Froze again, I guess.
Got disconnected again. I'm so
No,
sorry.
it's fine.
Yes, let me just. Okay. So yeah, so I have another very interesting question here. Somebody is asking, does uh, doing an MBA from Canada also open job opportunity, give an access to job opportunities in say US or any other parts of the world?
Uh, I would say no. In the short term, no. In the long term, yes. Now, like for example, I've thought about this personally myself. Um, Once you get your permanent residency in Canada, you are, I guess, 3 years away from getting a Canadian citizenship. And if you get a Canadian citizenship, it's a lot more easy to work in the US on something called a TN visa, on this NAFTA trade agreement that Mexico, USA, and Canada have. So it does open opportunities in the long term, and I guess 3, 4, 5 year horizon, but not so much in the short term. In the short term, you still end up applying as an H-1B candidate, and that makes it difficult.
Right, right. I have. Is there an average experience? Like, who is the if there was so what is the lowest experience in the candidate that Rotman has?
So the lowest experiences in our batch tend to mostly be people who are doing the law and MBA dual degree, because many of them have like literally no experience. And but they're in a minority, and there are people who are basically doing like a dual degree MBA, like JD MBA. From the MBA cohort, I think Rotman stresses on 3 years of work experience ideally, and it'll be good to get 3 years of work experience by the time you join, before to even reap the best benefits out of the MBA. Ideally, anywhere between 4 to 5 years is good. Like 4 to 6, I would say, is good. Yeah.
Right, right. Um, okay. So, okay, somebody is just asking a follow-up question from a recognition point. How valuable do you think a Rotman MBA is in a US job market?
How valuable it is. So yeah, so Rotman is at the end of the day part of the University of Toronto, and the University of Toronto holds very good cred in North America. It's consistently ranked among the top 20 universities in the world. So that does end up giving you good cred if you are applying to the US job market. But think about this. By the time you apply to the US job market, if you're an international student, you have 3 to 4 years of work experience in Canada already. So you are already 3, 4, 5 years away from graduating with that MBA degree. Then what matters more is that work experience that you've accumulated, and less so much which school you went to. So yes, that's something that you might want to be cognizant about. That it will give you a leg up out there in North America, but then your quality of work experience after your MBA might matter a lot more.
Right. In terms of Indian students, what is the average GMAT score that people really have?
I think it's around 700.
Okay.
Yeah, but I know people with
Uh,
a 700 have gotten, and I know people with a 760 have not gotten. So it's like it can be anything.
Right, right. So there are a few questions which are more very profile specific. Guys, if you're looking at profile specific questions, please reach out to us separately. We would love to discuss and talk to you. We have something I just want to, tell you that for all the students who are attending this webinar, you could go to our website, you could go to our online page. I will just give you the link. And there is a coupon over there, Crack MBA 2020. We'll be sending it to you on email for all those who have attended this webinar. And you could. This is a course which will give you all about what you need to do when you're planning your MBA in terms of the kind of career options, kickstarting your plan, going through what are the funding options available. So it gives you a very good understanding of whatever you need. All our one-on-one questions will be taken care of, right? So for all those who are specifically looking for specific profiles, I see very specific questions. Please get back to me. I would be happy to help. Akshat@trackable.com. With that, thank you so much, Akshat. This has been excellent. I had fun, conducting this webinar as much as the kind of information we had in this particular webinar about all we needed to know about Rotman and prospects in Rotman.
Yeah, and if anyone has any follow-up questions, feel free to connect on LinkedIn, and I'll try to answer as many as possible. And I guess you froze again.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what is happening
That's
today.
a bad internet day. It happens.
I know. So yeah, being in Bangalore, the what do you say, Silicon Valley of India, it's crazy to have such internet. Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah, guys. So thank you so much. I think it has been wonderful to have Akshat in this webinar, and it's been extremely, extremely informative as well as a lot of fun. Guys, you could just, if you have any questions, like I said, you could click on this link to use your coupon code, and there's also another link for your profile to get evaluated. So you could just, fill in the form and get your profile evaluated too for any specific profile related questions. Thank you, Akshat, once again. It's always been awesome talking to you, and all the best for your next 4 months for completing your MBA, and wish you good luck.